Welcome to the Information Security Forum podcast. I'm your host, Tavia Gilbert.
The human element of cyber and cybersecurity career, everyone's now in cybersecurity, right? Either they are a threat actor unknowingly or they're a potential defender.
That was our guest, Jeff Engle, veteran of the United States Army Special Operations Command and current Vice President and General Manager of Federal for United Data Technologies. In this episode of the ISF podcast, we bring you the last of 3 conversations with Jeff and ISF Managing Director Steve Durbin. In the final conversation today, Jeff describes the responsibility leaders within an enterprise have to be proactive in maintaining security, what he considers to be a bigger threat than WMDs, and the pitfalls of social media.
Because we are talking about not just time, we're talking about specialist resource, we're talking about training, and ultimately, of course, it all comes down to dollars and cents.
Right.
How do we get that message across into corporate boardrooms, Jeff? Because what you're talking about is requires a huge amount of commitment from the leadership of an organization in an environment where there are no guarantees.
Right.
So we cannot guarantee that there won't be a breach. In fact, we can do the opposite. We can guarantee that whatever we do, at some point, there will be a breach. So how do we get these messages across into the boardrooms?
I think what's most commonly used is fear.
It's effective.
Fear can be an effective deterrent, but it's temporary. If you get your leg cut off, it hurts until you pass out. So if you have the fear of getting your leg cut off, it's more sustainable than that, but it's still not a solution. I think the value of understanding, it can't be undersold. I think there needs to be structure, there needs to be policy that forces people who are going to have the fiduciary responsibility on the board of really any company, because technology now is integral to everything, whether you're critical infrastructure, part of the industrial base, or you're just part of the economy that ultimately in aggregate is critical. They need to understand the language, the security organization, so they can at least come 10% of the way there. Right? Like I talked about with my boss, we found a common language to where he can understand the challenges I'm facing, and I can communicate to him, and he can do the same with me. Right now, security is not a common language. Right? There have been efforts, obviously, by NIST to establish the cybersecurity framework and RMF to standardize, those types of processes and terminology. That's only going to get us part of the way there. That ultimately can just become a compliance thing. Did you do this versus did you get the value from it? So I think there needs to be a push to educate those that are sitting in those positions of authority. If they're on a public board, they need to be held accountable by their shareholders for addressing risk, for understanding what their risks are, and signing off on what risks they're willing to accept. And I think that requires oversight. They're obviously the CISOs and other C-suite are overseen by the board, but the board needs to be held to account for really recognizing and accepting or mitigating or transferring the types of risks that they face. There is an active effort in a number of organizations, right? And I can say this definitively, even though there are people who are exceptions to the rule, to ignore what the risks are. Say, well, it's not a risk to me because nobody brought it to me. And there's a little bit of wink, wink, nudge, nudge, don't bring this up type of thing. And ultimately, in some cases, they're going to need to be held accountable, with criminal liability. Because ignorance is not a defense with any other crime. So why should ignorance be a defense for the boards that willfully ignore the types of risks that they face?
It's interesting because at the start of the conversation, you equated a lack of appropriate response to cybersecurity needs to the effective weapons of mass destruction. That's a big claim, and if that doesn't strike fear in the hearts of the board, then I'm not sure what would.
I grew up with WMD. Obviously September 11th happened. I was part of the reconnaissance unit that was looking for Saddam's WMD. During the initial invasion. And I've had the benefit of a ton of education around the science and the impact of those types of things, the challenges associated with it. And it's caused me to become a little bit flippant about the actual impact. I think weapon of mass destruction is a term that's designed to inspire fear, but isn't very accurate. Depending on the isotope, a small radiological device isn't going to have that much of a physical impact. but it does have a huge psychological impact that there's somebody that's going to be doing that. Chemical weapons obviously are typically isolated. They're non-persistent, or if they're persistent, then they're isolated to a small geography, and it's challenging to disseminate. So we can go through the actual specifics of a scenario when it comes to a generally categorized WMD, and none of them are mass destruction, with the exception of the most challenging one and easiest to mitigate on the nuclear side. Cyber, we've taken the exact opposite approach. We have drastically underestimated the potential impact of the types of events. There's not the psychological now impact of them because nobody recognizes many of them are ignored, or they're not talked about because people don't want to expose that they were breached. But the impact that the cyber can have is much larger than any of those others. So when it comes to a weapon of mass destruction, I look at a number of potential cyber-related events as potentially even physically much more destructive, even though the traditional WMD kind of have the market cornered on the psychological impact. And part of that is our own creation. I think ultimately one of the better ways to address WMD and cyber and address the psychological impact of WMD and try and push it towards what's more realistically aligned with the physical destruction and get some more recognition about the potential impact of a cyber event, so people get a little bit more of that fear and change the way that they behave. I mean, the human element of cyber and cybersecurity career, everyone's now in cybersecurity, right? Either they are a threat actor unknowingly or they're a potential defender. So I think general education around that is important, but we're moving in a direction that allows for greater exposure. The amount of information that people put on social media and they don't recognize that facilitates their exploitation. That's an education gap. It's also a cultural thing that needs to be addressed. The balance is you can't have everybody thinking like I do, right? Can't have everybody thinking that there are people out there to get them. But maybe we could have them thinking that a little bit more. You see tons of people put the tape over their camera on their computer because they don't want to be watched on, who do you think wants to watch you, right? Meanwhile, they take 1,000 pictures and they put exactly where they are and who they were with and what they were doing, even doing things that were illegal, right? Which obviously is a challenge for us to recruiting the next generation of people that are supposed to be working within the national security arena. But I don't understand that disparity between people's actions and at least some level of recognition of the potential impact of them. I went through my first 30 years always avoiding things that potentially prevent me from doing something else I wanted to do. So no tattoos, stayed out of trouble, didn't do drugs, all those things positive, right? Well, it's hard to find people like me, finding people that can actually get a security clearance, that can really recognize what they can expose, that pay their bills, like the basic things that prevents potential exploitation. So yes, now I have Facebook.
Do you have tattoos?
I got some tattoos now. Yeah. And obviously our podcast listeners can't see that I've got this nice face tattoo, but no.
Quite elaborate.
Yeah. Those basic things. It's just like saving for retirement. People don't think ahead. You have to think ahead in order to have an effective cyber strategy. You have to have an organization that's thinking ahead, and the culture right now doesn't support that. I'm not old enough to say those millennials, right? I don't agree with that sense, but we are not going to be able to technology our way out of this. So hopefully we have another generational shift, and there's a better recognition of how to manage risk in all aspects of life, whether it be health, finances, or people's technology footprint. Because if there is, then the boards are going to be able to meet their fiduciary responsibilities. They're going to be able to manage risk, and they're going to know what to monitor based on a thorough analysis of what could potentially be the impact of exposure. And we're going to start identifying advanced persistent threats before they've been around for 9 months inside of our systems, or because our information is showing up on the dark web. But for now, we're going to have to take a lot more punches to realize we need to learn some better jujitsu.
I think there's some great points that you've made there, Jeff, and thanks very much indeed for coming in and sharing those with us.
My pleasure.
That concludes our 3-part series of conversations with Jeff Engle and ISF Managing Director Steve Durbin. If you missed episodes 1 and 2, be sure to visit the ISF media page to catch up. And come back soon for another valuable conversation with Steve and another expert guest. In the meantime, for more podcasts, videocasts, and additional resources for CISOs and anyone looking to enhance the security of their business, please visit securityforum.org. And we'd like to hear from you. If there's a topic you'd like us to cover or someone you'd like us to interview, get in touch through our website or tweet us at Security Forum. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back with you next time.